Hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 9 of The Last Battle, The Great Meeting on Stable Hill.
It was a great meeting, wasn't it?
Well, we haven't seen that much of the meeting yet. It kind of ends... This is probably... I wonder... I think this is true. I think this might be the last kind of exposition-heavy kind of setting up type chapter that we get. We don't get a lot of the meeting. We get just a little bit of it, but it does end kind of abruptly. Most of this chapter is about moving us from one point to another and really setting up the conclusion, not just of this book, but of the entire series.
Yeah. I don't know exactly how many chapters because I'm trying not to look.
I think there's 16. I want to say 16. So
16 total.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're over the halfway point.
This, yeah.
And it has to be a pretty, I imagine, big conclusion. So I imagine that this is where it's all action after this.
Or at least just very important conversation stuff. Right here, nothing, not until the very end does something really important happen. We got the introduction of Tash in the last chapter, and in this one we're just getting ready to really just have all of our characters, as far as they know, go towards their deaths. So why don't I go ahead and jump into the chapter summary here.
Let's hear it.
So this is chapter 9 of The Last Battle. Horrified at Farsight's news, the six Narnians realize their deaths are impending. Tyrion wishes for Eustace and Jill to return to their own world, but there's no way for them to go home. The Narnians decide to travel to Stable Hill, reveal Puzzle, and attack the 30 Calormans gathered there. If they're able to defeat them, they plan to ride out to Cair Paravel and die fighting the hordes of enemy soldiers now controlling the castle. On the way to the stable, Jill and Eustace wonder what will happen to them in England if they die in Narnia. The company arrives at the stable and hides outside of view as the rest of the Narnians congregate around Shift, Rishta, and Ginger. Everyone, including our heroes, is taken aback as Shift claims that a donkey is hiding in the woods, dressed up as a false Aslan.
Well done.
So there you have it. Kind of one more problem.
Yeah.
It just feels like every single time there's even a glimmer of hope, the bad guys are always just one step ahead.
Right. And it's this mixing in of truth to a very, very big lie.
I'm excited to talk more about that.
It's just so evil in a brilliant way, but it's still evil.
Mm-hmm. Back to the beginning of this chapter, we now have, I hadn't noticed this before, but we now have kind of 7 main characters, 7 being such an important number, right, in both Narnia and in the Bible. Now because Farsight joins them. So there's 7 of them, Narnians and humans, going, as this kind of last group of people fighting for the good of Narnia. They all react. I guess Farsight doesn't react because he's the one that brought the news. But they do all react to this news. And I wanted to point out something that I realized going through The Magician's Nephew recently. So you and I covered the radio drama on the Dancing Lawn not too long ago. Mm-hmm. And as I was listening to the radio adaptation, we got to the scene where Aslan sets apart the talking beast and the dumb beast. And I'd forgotten this, that the talking beasts grow larger physically than the dumb beast. So last chapter, when you and I were saying, how would they know that this is a talking beast? Well, the eagle's bigger than a regular eagle would be. So actually, Tyrion, that would make sense for Tyrion to look up and say, I think that's actually a talking beast, because the eagle looked bigger than a regular eagle would.
Yeah. Wasn't there something based on their flight pattern too?
He said based on the flight pattern, but maybe he was just trying to sound smart. I think he just was like, that looks like a bigger eagle.
I feel like we've both done that.
He wanted to impress them. It's like you just could have... It was impressive enough to know, but he had to make it sound like he really was intelligent. So, but the other 6 of them, they do react to this news. And an interesting question is given forward here, which is that Shift must, or that question, an assertion, which is that Shift must have actually been in league with the Calormans from the beginning. And I'd already forgotten which character said that. But I want to know your thought about this, that do you think that Shift had always been working with the Calormans, because we know that they attacked Paravel, they attacked it from the sea. And what's a little bit reminiscent of maybe the fall of Constantinople here, although there've been many cities throughout, or castles or walled structures that have fallen. But what is really important, obviously, in the 15th century is when Mehmed takes his ships over. I think he takes them over the Golden Horn into. He literally takes his ships over land, and Constantinople really ultimately falls because they're being attacked by both land and by sea. And I wonder if Lewis is, as a professor of medieval and Renaissance literature, is thinking about some of that. But the idea here is that, Shift must have, as soon as he found this skin, this lion skin, must have gone and, been in league with the Calormans from the very beginning. Do you think that's actually true here?
I don't. Do you?
No, I don't either.
I feel like when this kind of thing happens, at the very beginning, when someone's starting to do this, they have a much smaller goal. And then I think circumstances allow them to take on much more.
Yeah. I think it was Jewel that said, I just looked it up. Jewel says, there is no need of counsel. We see that the ape's plans were laid deeper than we dreamed of. Doubtless he has been long in secret traffic with the Tisroc, and as soon as he found the lion's skin, he sent him word to make ready his navy for the taking of Cair Paravel and all Narnia. Right? And I actually think Jewel's wrong here. And it almost is easier to believe this because it makes it feel like Narnia's downfall is much more significant. Like, this was a long planned attack. There was nothing we could have done. Where it's like, in actuality, what seems to be the downfall of Narnia is some random talking beast.
Yeah.
It almost seems as if it's just a coincidence. It's just, bad luck that Shift and Puzzle together find this lion skin, and from there, all of Narnia falls apart. And it's almost easier to believe that, they were thinking this all from the beginning than just, no, it's just bad luck.
Yeah. The more I think about it, the stranger it is that there's a lion skin just lying around.
We said a hunter had gotten this there was a dumb beast, had hunted the lion and then skinned it and then took the meat with him.
And then just left it lying around?
I guess so, yeah.
So it's their fault in a way.
In a way. But I mean, we could then just keep going back and back. Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it, right?
Yeah.
We could do that.
It doesn't actually work.
When I would teach the Homer, we would do that with who's ultimately responsible for, Hector's death or something like that. Is it Achilles who actually, kills him?
Are these other characters in the Simpsons? I'm not familiar.
Oh yeah. They're all in the Simpsons together. That's right. Is it Bart's fault? Because you can go around and say, is it the person who actually? And we did this with Puzzle. Is Puzzle responsible? Is Shift responsible? Who holds what responsibility? And I think ultimately it's just evil. It's just capital E, evil. And yes, evil uses both Rishta and Ginger and Shift, and yes, even Puzzle, right? But ultimately, this is a story about ultimate good versus ultimate evil, and hopefully it won't surprise you to know that ultimate good does win, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it does. Good does win, but not in the way that we might think it will. But goodness, Aslan, being this deity, this monotheistic deity, kind of the Chronicles, is able to ultimately win out. And I think what's hard is to see that something so just unimportant is what gets that snowball rolling down the mountain.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that fits into our world pretty well too. I don't think that everybody is working together, but I do think that different people doing evil things does work together. Sure. All those factors come into play together.
Yeah. Eustace then has a really great line because Tyrion says, he says, it's time for y'all to go home, right? You've done all that you were sent here to do. And Jill, by the way, is like, what are you talking about? Like, we freed you, but like, and he's like, well, yeah, but you freed me. I mean, I think he says that.
But now it's getting dangerous.
Yeah. But the way that he's like, yeah, you freed me. You helped, we got Pog and we freed Puzzle. And both Eustace and Jill are like, yeah, that didn't really do anything. Like, you're going off to your death. We've done things, but they're not actually accomplishing anywhere near our goal of saving Narnia, you know? But Eustace, and he has this great moment. He he says, we don't have any magic for getting back. And I love this character beat for him because it is very reminiscent of who he ultimately is as a character, going all the way back to his introduction in the first chapter in Dawn Treader, where he's very practical. He's very logical, right? And he's like, look, this is a silly thing to even argue about because we can't go back, Tyrion, right? Jill, you don't even need to fight him because there's nothing to be done about it. Let's not waste our time and energy arguing about something that ultimately none of us can change. And it's great to see that element, which was such a hindrance to his growth, at least at first it appears that way, that he does retain much of who he is after his undragoning, even 2 books later, right?
And now it's his strength.
Yes.
Yeah.
That practical, logical aspect of Eustace, although it gets on Jill's nerves quite a bit, but I think Lewis says he's dreadfully matter-of-fact, right? And I think even, he says he was fond of being dreadfully matter-of-fact. So he enjoys being like, well, hey, let me point out the logic to you here. Yeah. And I enjoy being the one to kind of tell you. And it's great to see the fact that for him, becoming what we might want to call a follower of Aslan here doesn't mean that he has to stop being himself, right? Now, the parts of him that are sinful or that are bad, yes, but we each have personalities. When we join the body of Christ, we don't also lose our individuality, right?
Yep.
There's this the idea of individuality and communion with all other Christians are not mutually exclusive, right? We can be unified and individual at the same time, right? In different ways.
I've noticed this now that I've been in the same consistent kind of small group. It's been really cool to see people who may frustrate me at first, but then you start to see how, those personality traits, as they continue to grow in Christ, are very useful. So someone might be really focused on details when you're trying to work on big picture stuff, but then also those details are really important.
Yeah.
And that's a very innocuous example, but it's really cool to see people slowly change as Christ works in their heart.
Yeah.
And all those things that may have been annoying become really positive traits. Yeah.
Moving on, Tyrion, once he does realize Eustace is right, that there's no way for Eustace and Jill to get home, he has this idea that maybe I'll send them off to Arkenland, which I really actually appreciate this from Tyrion because he is trying to hold on to what little control he has. At this point, he has 6 subjects, as far as we know. I mean, technically the other talking beasts are his subjects too, but he has very little control over them. And he's trying to protect them. He's like, y'all are teenage kids. I'll at least send you off where you can be safe. And Pagan, very thoughtfully, again, very dreadfully, matter-of-factly, points out, yeah, dude, if they take Narnia, where do you think they're going next, right? They're going next to Arkenland.
Yeah. Also, we don't know the way because there's no map.
To be fair, though, I do think you could be like, all right, what is Puzzle doing? I guess they need Puzzle because the idea is to reveal him. All right. But you could just say head, I assume.
Yeah, go that way.
Yeah, I assume that the sun does rise in the east, set in the west.
You're assuming a lot.
But now I'm not actually 100% sure. I'm trying to think back to Dawn Treader. Oh, wait. It's the world's flat, so I don't actually know how this works out. But you should be able, even without a compass, to say, that way south, just go straight. Mm-hmm. If that's...
if they have south.
Yeah, if they have south. Who knows? No, we know they have south because they do go north to get to the mountains, to Harfang. So Jill and Eustace have done this before. However... as I said, Pagan points out, look, they're going to go attack them next. And I think Tyrion is wanting to at least protect 2 people who he feels like, hey, think of, how responsible he must feel, the weight he must feel of, all of the, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of Narnians that are lying dead in Cair Paravel. They were all people who served him, and he wasn't even there when it fell. I know it's not the same thing as a ship, but it does feel weird that the king would lose his entire castle and not even be there. He doesn't even get to go down with the walls, if you will.
Yeah.
And so he probably feels guilty about that, a little ashamed about that. He was off hiding in a tower in the woods. And what's interesting, though, to me, and what I don't quite understand, and maybe this is where we can get, I don't know, a dozen emails from our listeners to help me understand, is why they don't go seek help in Arkenland. For all we know, there should be an army there and a king and a queen and other people. And I don't think from what we've understood throughout, especially The Horse and His Boy, Archenland is significantly smaller than Narnia, but there's people who live there. Why not regroup, go to Archenland, and then come back? And I do believe that it's maybe Poggin that later on in the chapter, I have to flip forward just a few pages, and I think it maybe is Poggin. Yeah, it looks like it is Poggin who says, hey, one of the things we could do is we could kind of go live out in the Western Waste as outlaws, right? And
just wait it out.
And we'll grow, stronger and stronger. Maybe some guerrilla warfare, kind of these short little attacks, and then eventually we'll grow larger, and Archenlanders will join us day by day. They'll become part of us, kind of almost like in the days of Miraz, is what Poggin says. My question, though, is why not just go straight to the Archenlanders first, and y'all regroup there? I don't think it's something, Tyrion too prideful or anything like that. I mean, he's very humble at this point. Why do you think they're not just going to go down south, get an army, and then go back and fight?
To me, it's a matter of timing. So if they go to Archenland, it delays too much, so they would just lose the battle, I guess is their thinking. But if they become outlaws, they would have a lot of time. Like, let everybody get comfortable, think they're not going to come back, and then go in. But it doesn't seem like a great idea either way. It seems like the move is to go now.
Yeah.
And then just trust that you can get the other Narnians to rally around you.
I guess I understand thinking, okay, there's 7 of us. There's about 30 Calormans at Stable Hill. And by the way, I'm not a military tactician. I'm also not a military statistician either. I don't know anything about the statistics, but also not a tactician as well. both apply for me. But thinking about the strategy here, I guess you could argue, okay, we want to reveal puzzle really quickly, so going and attacking Stable Hill might be the best. But then maybe after getting those Narnians, maybe some do turn back to their side and say, oh, we were wrong. Aslan has not commanded all these things, but then go south and get those reinforcements. This is the same kind of frustration I have in The Lord of the Rings in both the second and third parts, where I want, and they obviously do at the very end, I want Rohan and Gondor to work together. And to be fair, Tolkien has given me, as a reader, a much better understanding of why Rohan is so... both Rohan and Gondor are so unwilling to want to ask the other for help, right? Because of the history that they've had and the differences in their cultures and stuff. Whereas here, I don't know a ton about why. Maybe that's part of it for Tyrion. Maybe it's, well, the Archenlanders haven't helped us before, and why should they come now?
Right.
And it's used to saying, no, like they call for aid, we must go help, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Speaking of Return of the King in particular, here we get not from Tolkien. We get a scene as they do decide to go off to Stable Hill. We get a scene between Jill and Eustace asking about what happens when we die.
I was just about to bring this up. I am so curious about this.
Okay.
Because as far as we've read, it hasn't happened. And if it's going to happen, it needs to happen in this book, or we're not going to know. But there's also this interesting question of when they were transported so quickly, Eustace thought that they were in an accident, and that's how they're here. Yeah. And I haven't read ahead, so I don't know. Maybe that actually did happen.
Huh.
But they've pretty quickly stopped talking about it.
Yeah. Well, it's not a really fun thing to talk about.
It's not a fun thing to talk about.
What's interesting, too, is this question of what happens to their earthly bodies every time they're transported. So, in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, are the 4 children... Well, that's different because they're not transported as much as they just walk into it. So I would assume in Wardrobe that the kids just walk into it. It's not like there's 4 bodies in Narnia and then 4 bodies just lying limp in a closet somewhere. Yeah. Same thing with Dawn Treader in particular, where they're literally going into the painting, so they're not all lying just looking asleep in Eustace's room, right? Same with Silverchair, right? Magician's Nephew, it also appears that they're going back and forth. Caspian's a little bit less. It's not quite entirely clear how they move back and forth waiting in the train station. Like, are they just sitting there silently? Because they do kind of return at that exact same time. And again, Eustace's question here is, are we currently on, like, are we on the train right now or not? And if we were to die, do we just, like, as almost like an Inception, do we just wake back up in England?
Yeah.
Or do our bodies just Star Wars, like Obi-Wan, Ben Kenobi, right? Do they just disappear? Or do we then just have dead bodies on that train?
If they're on the train right now, are they asleep? Do they look like they're asleep?
Yeah.
Do they just kind of disappear and no one notices because that's just how it works out? But if someone did notice and they were acting kind of strange, like maybe they're having seizures or something, and someone taps them on the shoulder,
would they wake up from Narnia?
Offers them a chocolate frog or something? Would they come back in and out and in and out?
This is one of the first times, and this is not the point, and we'll get to the actual point of this discussion. It's one of the few times where any of the characters in Narnia appear to, outside of talking about how the time works, but there actually is an extended conversation about how any of this magic actually works. Like, wait, what is actually happening here, and what's going on back there? I mean, we get a tiny bit of this with the rings and Diggory and Polly, and we get a couple of short discussions about time passing. But it's usually like one character saying, well, time's probably a little bit different. Oh, you're probably right. Let's move on.
Right.
But this isn't going back and forth like, wait, what is actually happening? And I do have a little bit of fun with that. But what Lewis is really doing is having them really just question what is going to happen to them, and not what's physically going to happen to our bodies, but what would death be like? What is going to happen? And really, this is them not wanting to ask the question of, do you think we're about to go die? This is how they're actually feeling more comfortable asking it. They're focusing on the minutia of the details and not the, hey, what do you think happens when people die?
Yeah.
Do you really think we're going to go to heaven? Is there a heaven in Narnia? So do we get to, are we not allowed to go to Jesus's heaven if we die here in Narnia? And as I mentioned with Lord of the Rings, it reminds me of that scene, which again is not, Tolkien did not write this scene. It's probably the best scene I think that Jackson put into the trilogy of movies, is when Pippin and Gandalf are sitting, like probably on the 5th or 6th level of Minas Tirith, and Pippin's, asks about, what's death going to be like? And Gandalf talks about that far green country, the very famous scene. It's a beautiful scene. Both actors are incredible in it. And that's not in the books, or the book, I should say. There's a mention of a far green country. I think it has to do with Tom Bombadil, but it doesn't, none of that scene works out that way. And you know what scene I'm talking about, correct?
Vaguely.
Okay.
I am not on the same level with your Tolkien knowledge.
Okay, fair enough.
But I will say
it's
this.
not Tolkien. My Peter Jackson knowledge. No, because Tolkien didn't write that scene.
I'm definitely not on par with your movie knowledge. It took us 28 hours to watch that 14-hour series because you kept pausing it and explaining stuff.
Well, as everyone knows, you have to say, look, when Viggo Mortensen kicked that, he actually broke his toe. You have to tell everybody that's.
That one I knew, actually.
Oh, I'm sure everybody knows that one.
I
feel like
that's the fun one.
I did though pull up, because if you don't, I don't have the script for Return of the King in front of me, but I do have something even.
You don't have a copy with you?
No, I don't have a copy with me. I do actually have some words from Tolkien, and they actually come from the appendix found at the end of Lord of the Rings, and that first appendix. I don't remember if it's called Appendix 1 or Appendix A, but it's where you actually get the story of Arwen and Aragorn, which really is not in the book itself hardly at all. It is in the canon of Tolkien's world, but it doesn't come in the actual narrative itself. And Aragorn and Arwen, and we don't have to get into all of their story, but she gives up her immortality, right, or her ability to go to the Undying Lands to be with this mortal man. And as Aragorn speaks to Arwen near his death, he says these few sentences to her, and I think it does encapsulate what's happening in those conversations, and it's what Jill and Eustace, I think, are, or at least what Lewis is trying to communicate through these two teenage characters in a book that's written for children. Aragorn says this: "In sorrow we must go, but not in despair. Behold, we are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than memory." And I think right after he says that, that's when he dies, and Arwen has to obviously work through that loss of her husband. But that first part, it's in sorrow we must go, but not in despair, I think is maybe, again, this is Tolkien, but I think it applies to Lewis as well too, is maybe a great way to think about death, especially for our characters. Like, it is sorrowful, but it is not something that is full of despair.
Right. And despair would be just the lack of hope.
Yeah, I mean, death, even for us, like in the real world, is a very sad thing. But as Christians, we don't have despair. We don't have any hope. Like, every time I've been to a funeral, whether it's for a loved one or I'm just going because I barely knew. I've been to all kinds of funerals, and every time you go, there's different levels of sorrow, right? Yeah. If it's like I'm going to a friend of a coworker's or something like that, and I'm just there to support a particular person, or if I'm going to family members' funerals, there's incredible sorrow, right? That's the actual appropriate mood. Like, what's really interesting, I don't. Maybe this would have been like Tim Keller or something, which ironically he just passed away too. Speaking of death, it might have been him, and it might have been someone else that talked about kind of this idea that our culture is so uncomfortable with the idea of death. That's why we have so many like celebrations of life, right? Instead of a funeral. I don't mean that to like offend or hurt someone's feelings, because people maybe have been to those before or had loved ones that had something like that, but that actually like it while we do celebrate someone's life, it actually is appropriate to come together and be very, very sad. Yeah. It's appropriate to come together and say, this is not a celebration. This is a very tragic thing that has occurred, right? A very sad thing, and we should be sorrowful about it. That's what's different, and I think we have a hard time because we're so uncomfortable with death in our Western, culture, particularly in very affluent places like the United States of America, right? Compared to many other parts of the world, we just don't see death as often. I mean, think about like even just like the mortality rates of infants or something, right? Like we're just not used to, the idea for us is like, if a baby is born, we just expect that baby will live and go 300 years ago. And you're like, that just wouldn't be the case. Yeah. And so because of that, I think we often get confused with what it means to respond to death in a way that is full of sorrow, but not full of despair. And obviously, I think Tolkien just perfectly, this is why he's my favorite author. Sorry, Lewis fans.
Not on the show.
No, Lewis is my favorite author as well, too. I have a couple favorite authors. I think Tolkien's my favorite fictional author. Maybe I'll put it that. No, but that's tricky. There's some other great people too. Whatever.
This list will change in 2 months anyway.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm sure it will. But and I was also going to say maybe just of the 20th century, because there's other people outside the 20th century.
Speaking of that, isn't it interesting how your favorite might not be the best, or the one that you consider the best?
Oh, yeah.
I think about this all the time, where people on All Songs Considered talk about how they have their favorite album than the best album. Yeah. And what's interesting is the best album, I might listen to it once, and that's enough, because it might be something like Kendrick Lamar where it's difficult to listen to because it's a heavy subject matter, or it requires a lot to listen to it. But then your favorite might not be the best, but it's just your favorite.
Yeah. That's fair. I get that. Yeah. So just back to, because we've been talking a lot about Tolkien, but back to Jill and Eustace here. They seem to have this almost sense of, maybe it's melancholy. I don't quite know what it is. But the sense about this is they just have kind of accepted, and Tyrion as well too, right? They're talking about it, but it feels kind of emotionless in a way. And I wonder if that, again, is Lewis communicating to us that, no, they don't have absolute despair about this. Jill even says, I'd rather die here defending Narnia than, an old woman in her bed. I'd rather die here fighting for something that I love and care for, which again, for us as modern readers, I think this is something that Lewis's generation would have just understood so much easier than we would have, having lived through the First World Wars, right? It's something that we have a harder time understanding. Even the idea of like, what does it mean to be fighting a war where there's a clear right side and wrong side, And she's like, no, of course I want to die for what's right. I'd rather do that. And I think many of us deep down would be like, yeah, even if it's right, I'd rather just not die at all. And here we are with these two characters, what a 15, 16-year-old girl saying, no, like I want to die for what's right.
Yeah, go out fighting for Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, this is interesting, perhaps go out, well, let's go back a little further. I'd rather be killed fighting for Narnia than grow old and stupid at home and perhaps go about in a bath chair. The bath chair part.
Did you know what this was?
I had to look it up.
What was it? I did not look it up, so please tell me.
Basically a wheelchair.
Okay.
Kind of
Why
like
do they call it a bath chair?
A chair that you would lounge around in. Like, it seems like it's longer. A wheelchair is basically a seat with a back, and this is extended so your feet are propped up a little bit more.
Okay. It has nothing to do with an actual bath then?
It has to do with Bath, England.
The
place, because that's where
it was like invented or
they
something.
added wheels to a chair.
I was trying to imagine. I'm like, is this like a tub with wheels? Is this like, what does this mean? Like, I didn't look it up. I should have looked it up, but I did.
It seems like the kind of thing you'd find advertised in Parade magazine.
Yeah,
just a bath with wheels.
Yeah. So they had this conversation, which I really enjoyed, and then they do start doing some Splinter Cell up the hill. You remember that video game?
I didn't play it.
I didn't either, but I feel like that was I mean, this is a very niche reference, but like if you were a teenager between 2000 and 2006, those were really big secret games.
Yeah.
Or spying games.
Yeah.
Like you would sneak around and all those things.
Yeah.
I guess actually they're based off of books though, right? Like aren't they Tom Clancy? Tom Clancy, but have you ever read a Tom Clancy book?
No.
No.
I see him all the time
I'm sure
at
my
the beach.
dad has,
I feel like every beach house, when you buy it, the realtor gives you 6 Tom Clancy novels.
So you gotta have Tom Clancy, Danielle Steele.
John Grisham, Danielle Steele.
Yeah. Do you know he's a Virginian, John Grisham?
Yeah, he lives in Charlottesville.
Yeah, I think.
Have you read the BJ Novak piece about the something?
The amount. I wish I had $1 every time you asked me if I've read a
You'd
BJ
have
Novak
$4.
piece. How many is he just an author I need to be reading more of? I just think of him as Ryan, but I feel like you.
He's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, he was a great writer on the show.
Right. He was a great writer for the show. He was a great actor, and the more you hear him talk, the more you're like, oh, he was exaggerating himself to play some of these characters. All the startup stuff.
Yeah.
He actually made a startup. It was kind of like Twitter, but for lists where celebrities could post like their top 10 stuff. You would have loved it. It's hard to shut down, but that would have been kind of fun. I forget the total number of stories. That maybe can't be 60.
So it's all in one
It's one.
book?
It's one book of short stories. He also has 2 children's books that are really, really funny. There's the book with no pictures. That's one.
I know that book. Yeah.
So that one's really good. I think we may have given that one to your son. I can't remember.
I don't think so.
Maybe we read it to him one time.
Maybe you read. Yeah.
When he was here. Anyway, so he has all these short stories, and one of them is this something with John Grisham. And John Grisham has a book come out, but the new assistant at the publisher, he just used the placeholder title, The Something. And John Grisham sees it advertised in the newspaper. He's like, no, I was going to use a real title, The Something, and he's really upset about it.
That's
but
funny.
there are so many jokes about him, like going out to get the paper into Charlottesville home. Yeah. And he goes, he was still a print guy. Print had been good to him. And it's so many little things.
That's
You'd
great.
love it.
I need to read that. That's awesome. I've never read I've never read any of those people before. I probably should at some point just to understand what it's like to read one of those, you know?
I read 2 James Patterson books.
Okay.
And I think it is important to understand what the appeal is.
Yeah.
The chapters are 3 pages long.
Okay.
You can read 50 pages or 50 chapters in an hour and a half. And you can just
are there ghostwriters involved? Because these...
James Patterson does not write his own books.
Okay.
James Patterson writes the plot. He loves coming up with the plot, and then he has a ghostwriter. So almost every single book has the ghostwriter. And now the ghostwriters are having their names get bigger and bigger. Yeah. But for the most part, he just comes up with the plot and someone else writes it.
Good? Is the prose good at all? Is it just kind of like here, just some kind of the equivalent of going to see a Transformers movie, Yeah,
I don't know because I think I read this in maybe 8th grade. I went to a house and I forgot my charger for my PSP. That kind of puts it in a certain time frame for you. So I had to read.
Around that, you were probably trying to play Splinter Cell. So how we got this whole conversation started.
Splinter Cell was a little too intense for me.
Okay. But tell me about, so did you enjoy the book?
I did enjoy that. It's very plot based. It has a lot of cool things that happen. A lot of things that And it's a neat idea, but it probably wouldn't hold up to the closest inspection.
Okay.
And you
I'm
also
sure it's not great.
you fly through it. Some of the stuff's pretty unrealistic.
Yeah.
It's like watching an action film, or it's close to Fast and Furious movies. I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe next after we're done with the Chronicles of Narnia, this can become a the James Patterson podcast.
Ugh.
Or like, what's the guy that wrote Da Vinci Code and like Angels and Demons? We could do that one too. With
Brown something.
Dan Brown. Yeah,
Dan
that's
Brown,
like all
yeah.
in that same kind of.
I did read one Dan Brown novel. I gave everything a try.
I read Angels and Demons in 7th or 8th grade. I know I read Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons when I was in middle school, before whichever movie they made first came out. Probably, and I remember thinking as a 7th or 8th grader, like, you books are fine. Like,
Yeah.
I remember enjoying Angels and Demons more, just because I actually at the time, growing up as a Protestant, didn't know. And again, the book is not factual. It's like, no, but I just didn't even know a ton about the Vatican.
Mm-hmm.
And so because it took place there, I thought, oh, this isn't like, I enjoyed that more. I thought Robert, what's the main character's name? It's Robert something. Someone's yelling at their iPhone. Right? Langdon, Robert Langdon. Thinking he was just a pretty boring character.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking that the other stuff in the book was kind of fun, you know?
One of the books he wrote before the Da Vinci Code was Digital Fortress.
Okay.
And it's about the NSA. And I was blown away. This is before Snowden. This is several years before the Snowden stuff came out. And I was like, is this a real is the NSA a real organization?
Yeah, my cousin used to work there.
I looked into all this stuff. This is real stuff.
Yeah.
And I was very surprised, and I just kind of assumed from that point that all of our phone calls were being listened to, and then
this is why you won't answer my phone if or won't answer the phone if I call you.
Right, yeah, I prefer texting. End-to-end encryption.
Because the FBI can't figure that one out, or the NSA, whatever. Well, we're a little off topic here. But let's go back into these 7 Narnians are sneaking through the woods, tree by tree. Lewis even says, "Hey, this would actually be pretty boring if I described all of it to you." But they eventually are able to sneak up almost all the way to the stable itself. We get a little goodbye between Tyrion and Jewel, who kind of have this idea that their death is quite close to them.
Especially if you're trying to have a unicorn kiss you.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. By the way, speaking of the unicorn here, Lewis has, I had not thought about this, but we've spent so much time with the different Narnian stories at this point. Lewis says that Farsight does not ride, but kind of sits upon, or does ride on the back of Puzzle, the donkey, because everyone knows you would absolutely not ride a unicorn. I remember in every single one, maybe not Don Treader, but the first 2 Narnian movies, we see Edmund ride on top of a unicorn.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He definitely, or maybe it's Peter. One of them rides on a unicorn.
Well, what else is probably okay? Locking yourself in a wardrobe?
Yeah. I don't really think it's that big of a deal, but I just thought it's funny that that definitely happens in the movies, even though Lewis says, no, you wouldn't do that.
Oh, you're talking about the movies. I got you.
Yeah, in the movies. It doesn't happen in the book. What's interesting to me, and this tells you how incredibly tired and exhausted these characters are, is they sneak almost all the way up to the stable, and then almost all of them take a nap. Like, just maybe 100 yards or so from soldiers who want to kill them, and Shift and Ginger and Rishta, a couple of them fall asleep. And I think Tyrion even has a pretty great nap from what we hear.
It seems like one of his superpowers is getting a good night's sleep. He's able to wake up exactly when he wants to. He's always super well rested.
Yeah.
And it's not a Princess and the Pea situation. These are not comfortable surroundings that he is surrounded by.
Yeah. It then becomes evening. The bonfire is lit. And not long after it's been lit, we have Rishta Tarkan and Ginger walking out. Ginger really strutting out here. Mm-hmm. And Shift being led. He's actually holding Rishta's hand and really complaining about all this and having to be up so late. And what's really interesting is, and we don't see much of this, but supposedly Ginger has some important part to play coming up, but the chapter ends before we get to see it. But Shift the ape says that something horrible has happened. And before we even hear this, we know that Rishta says, hey, wiser heads have put these words in your mouth. So this is absolutely not Schiff's idea. This is Rishta, and we assume Ginger's. Schiff says something along the lines of something absolutely terrible has happened, probably the worst thing, the most wicked thing that's ever been done in Narnia, that someone has dressed up like Aslan, which very quickly he's correct and say, no, Tashlin, right? Tash and Aslan are just the same god. It's just one name for all these different gods. You know, every god that's worshipped by all different cultures, it's all really just one thing. Can
we pause here for a second?
Yeah.
How far in advance do you think Lewis planned this?
What do you mean, how far in advance?
Did he come up? We've heard of Tash before.
Yes.
Did he intentionally make Tash have a similar slant rhymey kind of feeling to Aslan?
Oh, I would assume so because now I've forgotten. I don't have it in front of me, but I could easily maybe correct myself. No, let's be honest. I'm not gonna remember for the next episode, so I won't say I will. But I believe that he had written The Last Battle, so it comes out in 56. But I think it was finished in 53 or 54. And in fact,
he wrote it. Okay, and then this came out in 56.
In fact, I know that when we covered Magician's Nephew, or maybe we might not have said on the podcast, but he finished Magician's Nephew after he finished this book.
Okay.
It did come out last. And so what I don't know is, has he finished Horse and His Boy or not?
Right.
But regardless, Horse and His Boy was published the same year that this book was written. So yes, I think at that point, by the time he's writing Silverchair, Horse and His Boy, Magician's Nephew, he knows how this is going to end. So yes, I do think that is he is mindful of that.
Yeah. And maybe it was something else. He just did a find and replace and solved it all out.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Don't be such an idiot, Dwigged.
I was just thinking of the same episode of The Office. But yes, I mean, maybe we'll wait more until next chapter to talk about this idea of Tashlin, because I think we might have more to talk about, or might have more context for this idea of both of these deities being one and the same. But Shift, as Lewis writes, as the narrator says, that under this devilish, cunning plan, they had mixed in a little bit of truth and had made their lie far stronger. He says somewhere out there was a donkey pretending to be Aslan. Aslan is pretending to be Tashlin, and Aslan the lion is very angry about this, or Tashlin again. I'm acting like Shift. I can't get the names right. Yeah. And so
this is how it starts.
He doesn't say this, but the implication is, hey, if any of y'all see a donkey dressed up as a lion, well, that perfectly fits into the narrative we've been selling you. Mm-hmm. It doesn't undermine the lie. Instead, it proves it.
Yeah.
And Poggin ends the chapter by saying this is cursed cleverness and believing that this is a lie of Ginger's making. And that's where the chapter ends. Did you see this coming at all? This idea that they would just twist the lie just enough to make it, twist the truth just enough to make it like, wow, our heroes have nothing at this point.
Right. I did not see this one coming. I was horrified when I read it. Mm-hmm. I haven't quite been able to put my finger on what it reminds me of, but it feels so familiar. And whenever someone does something that has that truth mixed in, mm-hmm. but at the same time is doing something evil. And this is kind of a melodramatic example, but with the cigarette industry and with vaping coming out, they're saying, hey, quit smoking. Smoking's bad. Vaping will help you quit smoking. And it's mm-hmm. just, it's so frustrating because yes, we've all been saying that smoking is bad for you and that you should quit. Mm-hmm. And then you're now switching this for something else that's also bad, and we'll put the money right back into that same company.
You know, what you're saying is in that marketing, they're acknowledging, yes, smoking is bad, exactly, yeah. Right? And so there's the truth part of it.
We're all saying the same thing.
Yeah, you're able to bend it. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things, and I think a lot of times we look at Lewis's, some of the narrator's comments, and we talk about how it might be Lewis's commentary on kind of a modern or postmodern philosophy. I think this is one of the times where this is, no matter when you would write this idea of mixing a little bit of truth to make a lie stronger really can resonate with all of human history,
Yeah.
right? From very big systemic lies that have truth mixed in with them to very small lies that you tell to your parents or to a sibling or to,
Yeah.
and you mix in just a little bit of truth to make it believable. I also wondered too, this is more on the micro level, not the macro level, which maybe is a little bit less insidious, right? If I'm, lying to my parents about cleaning my room or something like that as a kid, and you say, well, yeah, I cleaned it. And what you're thinking to yourself is, well, I didn't clean all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I put like 3 things away.
I went through the act of cleaning it.
So it's the
for 3 seconds.
So it's the whole, well, what did you mean by cleaning,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can get into that. Now we're into the semantics of it all. And I think on those micro levels, there's a part of us that, or at least a part of me, I shouldn't speak for everyone else, that makes me like, I know that lying's wrong, but if I'm now just playing the semantics game, well, it's no longer a sin. It's instead an intellectual exercise, right? What do I mean by this? What does that word really mean?
Yeah.
Right? And we see it on, systemic macro levels. I mean, we could even point to, I don't know which way. It's like you could point to even some maybe of the scandals of the 90s. I'm thinking of a particular really big one. You got a word, you're not quite sure. What does that word mean?
So important to define things.
Yes. But I'm particularly thinking about on these kind of, very individual, person to person kind of things. It's a way for us, if we know what's right and wrong, to try to make ourselves feel better about lying. And that's very different here. Schiff seemingly does not care what's right or wrong. He's not even incredibly malicious and evil for the sake of being malicious and evil or wanting that power. He just is a selfish ape who wants more nuts. That's all, he wants to be lazy.
Yeah.
Right? It's Rishda and the cat who have much more, malicious intentions here.
Yeah.
But again, Schiff is not trying to make himself feel better, but we definitely do. At least whenever I've lied. Not that I ever do that.
Well, there it is again.
Oh no. But I want to be mindful, and I've caught myself even doing this as an adult, where I'll say something, where I don't mean to lie, but it just comes out.
Oh yeah, it just happens so quickly.
And thankfully, especially if I'm doing it, if like I'm saying something to Anna, and I'll be like, and she'll even call me out. I'll be like, I don't know why I said that. Like, there was just something innately within me that she's like, hey, were you able to pick that thing up? And I forget that it's like, oh, I forgot. Or it's like, actually, wait, I didn't forget. I remembered it halfway home. And I guess I did forget at the time, but I could have gone back and I chose not to. And so, yes, I did forget, but also I chose to then not do it. And, it can be small things like that where either I have a wife who is kind enough to help me realize the error of my ways, or hopefully I'm mature enough to say, you know what, that's actually not completely true. It's only kind of true, and I need to be honest about that.
I've had 3 or 4 people at key moments in different stages of life, high school, college, who I would say something and they would just ask what I said back to me. And then I would start backpedaling and I would realize, I think I said that because I wanted to appear cool, or I wanted to appear that I knew what I was doing, or I was hoping to impress someone who I'm hoping is listening. And the actual truth is this. And I feel like it's part of why having a conversation is so important, because you get closer to the truth the more you kind of talk about it and get toward it.
So I really love the end of this chapter. I think it's a really helpful reminder for us, like I said, on both a personal, individual level about where do we do this, right? But then also, and I think we'll wait and get into this in the next coming chapters, where is this done to us, right? You talked a little bit about like, cigarette marketing or something, but there's also like even more nefarious ways that it can be done. And I think we'll see a little bit more of that as these next few scenes unfold in the chapter, but maybe that's a great way for us to think about moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, next time, Phil, we're going to be in chapter 10, which is called Who Will Go into the Stable? And in that chapter, someone goes into the stable. We do any final thoughts? What do you think is going to happen?
It's 2 chapter titles in a row with stable in it.
Yeah. Any idea of what might happen next?
Well, based on the picture, it looks like someone is going to have a cat run past them.
Someone's going to have a cat run past. Oh, yeah. This is riveting drama here.
Right.
What will that cat do?
They're so fast, they're leaving lines behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
look forward to that.
It's going to be a good one. I'm really looking forward to it here and the chapter after that is the pace quickens with it or something, or maybe something like that.
Yep.
So that's when you really know we're getting near the end. But we do have listener feedback today. We've got an email coming to us all the way from Denmark. It's an email from Suzanne, and she wrote us a really great email. I'm going to read part of that email focused on the Snow Queen, and I wanted to do this because I recently saw Frozen for the first time, actually. Have you ever seen it?
For the first time?
No, never. For the first time
in
forever,
theaters,
it felt
man.
like. Yeah. Did you really?
Yeah.
You saw it in theaters?
I saw
when we were
Frozen in
college?
theaters.
Okay.
Yes.
Good for you. It was a good movie. It was fun. Songs were fun.
I loved it.
It was enjoyable. Yeah. We've only watched it.
I thought Olaf was hilarious.
Yeah, I did not like the Olaf character.
Oh, really?
It wasn't for me. But again,
you should have seen it in college.
Okay. Sorry. It was
with a lot of Skittles and cherry Coke flowing through your veins.
Okay, fair enough. But I need to be honest here. At the end, it says it's based off of the Snow Queen, which you and I have mentioned before. The Snow Queen. I'm sure it came up maybe in the first season that Lewis based some of his ideas for wardrobe off of the Snow Queen. I did not realize that Frozen was based off of that. And so what was funny is we got this email back in June, literally a week after I saw Frozen for the first time, which I thought was kind of fun because at the very end of it, Suzanne even pointed out that, hey, you might not know this, but the Disney movie Frozen is very loosely based off of the Snow Queen. It's quite a different story. So all of that is just the context for this email. I want to read a little bit of what she has to say to us here. Dear Phil and Daniel, thank you for a great podcast. I'm a Danish Tolkien and Lewis enthusiast, so I apologize in advance for my poor English. Her English, by the way, was phenomenal. I found your podcast last year, and I've tried hard to catch up as I am rereading the books simultaneously, and currently I'm at The Horse and His Boy. You mentioned The Horse and His Boy that different parts in episode 10, that different parts regarding characters in the narrative of Jadis and Edmund and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe resemble the Snow Queen and Kay in The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, who, by the way, is a Danish author. It is my favorite fairy tale, and I'm sure you would enjoy it too. Of course, parts get lost in translation. So we must have talked about it in Horse and His Boy, not in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Or maybe both.
Maybe both. I only think I've known about it for a few years, so I don't remember when we brought it up. But yeah, I'll keep going on. Of course, parts get lost in translation, but the story is still beautiful. I'll try to explain some similarities and differences between Lewis's fantasy novel and Andersen's fairy tale. The Snow Queen is like Wardrobe, very much a story of good and evil. It begins as a fairy tale version of the fall. The whole world, capital F fall, as in the biblical fall, the whole world is polluted by small fragments of a broken mirror, which was made by a troll. That was your dog growling that might have come through the microphone. The narrator of the fairy tale kindly explains to the readers that the troll is the devil. The mirror fragments are therefore an allegory of sin entering the world. In the next chapter, we hear about a boy and a girl, Kay and Gerda, who are neighbors and very good friends. The small boy, Kay, gets pieces of the troll's mirror in his eye and heart. Kay's personality changes, and he becomes mocking and critical. Maybe he resembles Edmund in the beginning of Wardrobe a bit. Then, the Snow Queen and her sleigh enter the story. She kidnaps Kay, who has hitched his small sled onto her sleigh. The Snow Queen is depicted as a witch, and her literal coldness and connection to winter and snow is contrasted with the warmth and kindness personified by the main character, Gerda. In my interpretation, the Snow Queen symbolizes cold intellectualism, and she separates Kay from his true destiny. He is vulnerable to this because of the mirror fragments, aka the sin, but you can also argue that she is a devil-like figure, much like Jadis, or Jadis,
as we've heard
in the radio dramas. One of my many favorite parts is when Kay is stuck with his small sled behind the Snow Queen's sleigh. He wants to pray the Lord's Prayer, but he can only remember how to multiply, which in this situation obviously is not very helpful. Yeah, I have no memory of this in the thing, so I got to go back and read this.
Yeah.
Gerda, on the other hand, remembers how to pray, spoiler alert, and she saves Kay in the end. In the Wardrobe, winter and summer are a very important part of the narrative due to Jadis's winter spell over Narnia. The winter in the Snow Queen is not magical. The Snow Queen has her palace far north, which is obviously cold, but when Kay and Gerda return home, it's emphasized that summer is blessed and warm. In the Snow Queen, There's no godlike character like Aslan, but it's filled with Christian symbolism and elements. As you state in your podcast, there's no evidence that Lewis ever read The Snow Queen, but the fact that we have one author, C.S. Lewis, who writes a supposal about God in the Christian life, and another author, Hans Christian Andersen, who writes an allegory within the narrative of a fairy tale with some of the same themes and some striking similarities, it's quite remarkable, and I love this, somewhat mysterious.
Wow. That's really neat. Hans Christian Andersen was 1800s?
He was 19th. I don't remember when in the 19th century, but yes, he was a 19th century author.
Okay. Well, it sure sounds like and it sounds so similar that I would imagine Lewis read it at some point. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess there's no actual evidence connecting or proving that he read it.
To be honest, I don't remember where we got. I'm sure it was in one of the books that I regularly look to. Mm-hmm. Where I read that he hadn't read that. It is really surprising, given Lewis's fascination with fairy stories, that he would. Now I have his dates in front of us. So he was alive, not Lewis, Andersen, 1805 to 1875. So we're talking just a few generations before Lewis, right? It is hard to believe that he would not have been familiar with the snow. And what I can't believe is that he had to have known some of, here we go. Little Mermaid, Nightingale, Ugly Duckling, Little Match Girl, Thumbelina, Princess and the Pea. Like Emperor's New Clothes, right? He had to have been familiar with some of those.
That's the other thing is Hans Christian Andersen is a very big name. Yeah. Especially now. But all those stories, there's no way, right?
Yeah, The Snow Queen was first published in 1844, so about 100 years before Lewis is writing Narnia, and actually, really, yeah, exactly during the 40s when he's writing Narnia. Yeah, it's just hard to believe. I need to go back and remember where I read that he was not familiar with it. Now I'm wondering, is that an actual fact, or is there just no evidence that he ever read it? Right. He did write a lot about the books that he read.
It's probably that there's no evidence, and people are just being cautious.
So interesting, I really love this email from Suzanne pointing out these details to us, even alongside kind of the history of Lewis's influence or lack of influence from this. It is, I love when we find stories that, like outside of even some of the imagery here of the snow and stuff, this tale of good and evil in The Snow Queen is so similar to the tale of good and evil that we find in Wardrobe. And it makes sense, like with even coldness being bad and warmth being good, mm-hmm. right? I love that humans, we just love telling these same stories over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
It's so fun.
I think we've talked before about how the Christ story is told over and over in movies. Mm-hmm. We always have a savior coming and there's some prophecy and stuff, and it's a really good story.
Even like you literally go to Frozen now, spoiler alert to a movie that I'm sure everyone but me had seen. Like there's some even Christ imagery there with Anna, the character who sacrifices herself for another character, right? Mm. She gives up her own life in sacrificing for the life of someone else, and in some way she's almost resurrected because of her love, right? So they're very clear elements, and I don't know that was necessarily what Disney was pulling for, right? In fact, they might not have been thinking about that at all, but because it's a story that resonates deeply with us, just like those ancient myths of Balder and Osiris did with Lewis, we love the story of someone dying and then being resurrected out of love. Well, why? Because it's the story. It's the story written on our hearts.
Dr. Jerry Root talks about this. He got to answer questions. He gave a talk, and he wasn't allowed to mention certain things, but then during the talk, he was allowed to answer whatever questions were asked. And he talked to some people afterwards, and he said, I've noticed all these Christian themes in these Disney movies. And they said, yeah, we've been sneaking that stuff in for years.
yeah.
And they said, but other people have been sneaking other stuff in there too. So it's kind of this mix of the two things. Yeah.
I'll have to keep an eye out now that I'm watching so many Disney movies. What one hilariously, I had seen probably Cinderella 85,000 times.
Wow.
We watched that one not too long ago, and I was like, oh, I remember every scene in this movie. I don't know why. It must have just been one of the ones we had on VHS. We did not have a ton of Disney movies on VHS.
I will say, I think that the ones that you watch the most are the ones that are in a place where you don't have other things to conflict with it. So at my grandmother's house growing up,
Okay.
there was not a ton of stuff, but we had the Great Mouse Detective and the Rescuers, so we watched that a ton.
I don't think I've ever seen The Rescuers, but I love The Great Mouse Detective.
It's so enjoyable.
It's so terrifying.
At least it was when I was 8.
I
watched it 40 times.
Yeah, I mean it's scary. It's a scary movie.
It is
the
scary.
The bat looking thing. Oh my goodness. Well, again, thank you, Suzanne, for this wonderful email and this great discussion we've been able to have, and thank you for listening across the pond. We appreciate it. Yeah. Can you say across the pond for all of Europe, or does that just mean like the UK?
I feel like we can say it.
We can say, but like, would that even apply, like, to listeners in, I don't know, West Africa, right?
Yeah.
If you're listening from like Lagos,
it's all one big pond.
Yeah. I feel like I've only heard it in relation to like us in England, but
well, that's because we're it's in English.
that makes sense. Yeah. Well, from now on, I think actually directly across from us, actually maybe this is North Carolina because that's where we always go to the beach. I think that's Portugal is like directly, like 50-50 chance here. Latitudinally, is that latitude? I think that's across. Yeah, longitude is north to south.
Latitude, the lines go north to south.
So latitudinally, from where we go to the beach in North Carolina, I want to say is Portugal. Okay. So that would really be across the pond for us.
Yeah. We always go to a place that faces south, so it's a completely different thing.
You know what? We do too, because we often go to Ocean Isle or Sunset Beach. So that also faces south. So across the pond for us is South America. Right. And Cuba maybe gets in the way in there somewhere.
I wonder how far you can see before the curvature of the Earth gets in the way. But sometimes visibility is 10 miles, sometimes it's 14 miles.
Sure.
You probably can't even see that.
When was the first time you sat on the beach? This is the last question that we'll end. This is like a dancing lawn question at this point. When was the first time you stood on the beach and just squinted as hard as you could to see if you could see across?
3 weeks ago. I know that there's nothing there, but I still try because as in elementary school, I would imagine England is right over there. You can kind of see the outline of the cities, and it's all pure imagination. And then it's only when you look at a map that you realize, oh, no, that was, like in this case, that was some of the islands in the Bahamas. Yeah. Or that, if it wasn't those, if they were low enough, it would have been Cuba. But, yeah.
All right.
Well, thanks, Suzanne, for sending that in. I really appreciate getting to hear other perspectives, but also when different influences come into play. So we grew up with different stories, I imagine.
Yeah, I would imagine that Andersen, which we read here, obviously in America, but is even more important, right? Even more valued and honored in Denmark, which would make sense, right?
Yeah. Well, let's wrap us up here. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to thenarniapodcast@gmail.com. Voicemails can be left at 406-646-6733. You can also find our previous episodes, links, and book information at lamppostlistener.com. We'd appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts to help other listeners find the show and join our read-throughs. Thanks for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 10.